I'm always interested in how people come to their beliefs in anything, really, political, religious. It doesn't matter why people think the way they do and why people act the way they do. I'm just super interested in where that comes from, because it comes from somewhere, and usually from someone's childhood. So just a couple examples, like Kevin Spacey, right? He did all these horrible things, and I remember reading about his childhood. His dad was a horrible person. It's one of the worst stories I've ever heard. He would rape his sons repeatedly. He taped pornography all around the walls of their house. Kevin, when he was a kid, he could never invite anyone over because his dad was just a monster. Elton John, wife and I, we just watched that movie Rocket Man. His dad hated him, left the family. His mom was cruel. No one ever said, "I love you." No one ever hugged him. He was never comfortable with himself, and this explains, among other things, just the over-the-top costumes that he always wore. He was always trying to run from being Reggie. And he made up this whole fake persona to try and find love. Bill Clinton, his mom, no one ever talks about this. Bill Clinton's mom abused him horrifically as a child. Hillary did an interview back in 1999 and said, Bill's mom hurt him in ways you wouldn't believe. And she said, when that happens to you as a child, it scars you. And she said, you keep looking in all the wrong places for the parent who abused you, right? So you look for things to numb the pain. So we can do this all day, right? And I want to say, I'm not making excuses for bad behavior, just trying to find the root of it all. And it's true for all of us. We all have traumatic moments in our childhood that has changed the way we think, and therefore the way we act. So Bernie Sanders, that's my big introduction for Bernie Sanders. Why is Bernie Sanders a communist or a democratic socialist, whatever? Why is he a commie? What happened in his childhood that set him down this road to where he is today? Imagine a 6-year-old Bernie. 6-year-old Bernie Sanders living in Brooklyn, New York. There was an ice cream man in town, came by his street every couple days, and Bernie would grab a nickel and go buy a popsicle. But some days, there would be a really large crowd around the ice cream man. And Bernie's 6 years old, he never knew why. And whenever there was a crowd, it was always a crowd of men, right? Sometimes there was a crowd of kids, but then every once in a while, there's this big crowd of men around the ice cream man. And he didn't know why. Turns out the ice cream man was also the local bookie. And he was taking bets on the tonight's Brooklyn Dodgers baseball game. Bernie was a massive Brooklyn Dodgers fan. Today, right now, if you ask him, he's 78. If you ask him the starting lineup of the Yankees and the Dodgers from 1956, he'll rattle it off the top of his head. He remembers one time when he was 6 years old, he stayed home from school, he was sick, and someone dropped off at his house a Brooklyn Dodgers shirt. And today, he still says that was a very meaningful present to me. He's 78, this is when he was 6, and he remembers receiving that gift. He would go with his friends to Ebbets Field. It would take about 30 minutes to get there. And he'd go to as many games as he could. He learned arithmetic by calculating the batting averages. He'd sit in the stands and he'd cheer on Jackie Robinson and more importantly, Sandy Koufax, who was Jewish. Fast forward, he was 16. And really no exaggeration, one of the most traumatic things that could possibly happen for a 16-year-old Brooklyn Dodgers fan happened. They moved to LA. It was traumatic for him. He was shocked, came out of nowhere. Today he says it was like they moved the Brooklyn Bridge to California. How can you move the Brooklyn Bridge to California? Now, you may think I'm making all this up, right? And I know on my radio show for years, we've been sharing stories about people's childhood. We're gonna do it coming up about Clarence Thomas and how that shaped him as an adult. And I know that whenever I talk about this, people in the news and I talk about the childhood and why they act this way, every time I can feel the skepticism. And I know this TV is only one way, right? So I can't see you roll your eyes, but I know you're rolling your eyes. And like, oh, here goes Slater again. All right, so Slater, you're saying Bernie's on the far left because the Brooklyn Dodgers left for LA when he was 16. That's what you're trying to tell me? Yes, that's right. That's exactly what I'm telling you. But in reality, I can't even take credit for this insight. It's actually not that insightful. He pretty much said as much. He said, I don't want to tell you that it was the sole reason that I've developed the politics that I've developed. But as a kid, I did see in that case about the Dodgers, about the greed of one particular company, and that impacted me. Another time recently, he was telling a story of him growing up, and he said, I remember when I used to walk down my old Brooklyn, my old neighborhood in Brooklyn, and then he kind of trailed off, and he said, that was before the Dodgers went to Los Angeles, which was the worst thing that ever happened. Right? Just just an aside, that's the worst thing that ever happened. He's 78, he hasn't gotten over it. This is the New York Times said, perhaps no single event has proved more enduring in Mr. Sanders' consciousness, more viscerally felt in his signature fury towards the 1%, than the day he was told that his neighborhood heroes belonged to someone else. Bernie's a commie because the Dodgers left LA. One of the worst emotions that a human can feel is betrayal. And you can brush the story off as like a silly thing. It's just a baseball team, whatever. And it is a silly and all that. But not to a 16-year-old boy. This was a massive betrayal. So have I proven, before we move on, have I proven how important this was to him? This moment was and is imprinted on his heart. Now, here's why it's relevant today. He thinks that the Dodgers left because of greed. And because of that, his entire life from that point forward, he looks at everything through the lens of greed. Just like Karl Marx, he believed that the world operates, capitalism operates based off of greed. And he hates it. Slater Crusaders, thanks for watching the first on YouTube. If you want more, like, subscribe. We got plenty.